Still on Rule 10. That's a lot of things he writes about that. It's not everything he writes isn't necessarily about this particular rule. He's including a lot of information about discipleship and just kind of good general information that the white magician or the disciple will need to be able to fulfill his purpose. The next section is on what he calls the founding of the hierarchy. And he talks about unfoldment and experience and how the two words are linked. He says, experience leads to unfolding higher consciousness. So, in other words, the greatest thing that leads us to higher consciousness is undergoing some type of new experience. And the tendency of everybody, no matter probably even the masters themselves, is when you reach a certain plateau, you just want to sit back and relax, and you think, well, I've had experience enough for a while, because a lot of experiences that really teach us are kind of tough. And because of that, the tendency is, well, let me just kind of relax. And so and relaxation is good, because we reach a point where we need to absorb our experiences, contemplate them, and make the most of them. But then after that, we have to go on to some new type of experience. And if we don't go to the new type of experience on our own, what does our soul do? What do you think? Let's suppose, Edward, you're just kind of just relaxing, and you're just thinking, well, I've done enough for this life. I'm just going to relax. And your soul looks down and sees you're still in pretty good health and everything. What do you think your soul's going to figure out for you?
Well, my soul looks for new ways to become more aware. And I see that only through experience do we become more aware and more conscious.
Yeah.
And I say, I am the soul. So I look for various new ways to express what's already been shared with me.
Right. And here's the thing, is when we decide on our own to go into new experiences and do new things, then the soul looks on and says, well, he's progressing all right, so I'm not going to have to provide some type of painful experience to prod him forward. But then if we just kind of relax, and the soul looks down and thinks, well, you know, he's kind of being complacent, so the only way he's going to budge is if I engineer some type of painful experience for him.
So I have friends in high places who arrange experiences for me.
Yeah. So what we need to do to avoid pain is look to see where we are and think, well, what's the next thing I need to do? Okay. And so assess something that will help you to progress. And if you pick that thing, pick something that's really going to help you, then your soul will look on and think, well, looks like he doesn't need any additional pain to prod him on. So that's the least painful way for the disciple to move forward, is to look ahead in his own path and engineer something where he's going to do one of two things: either make progression himself or do something of service to help others in their progression. So the disciple needs to be doing one of these two things. Now, sometimes we do need a rest. And when you're taking a rest at the right time, it will just feel right. You know, you'll feel a peace about it. So and that's what the Sabbath is about. One period out of 7 is designated as a period of rest where we sit back, relax, contemplate about what we've done, contemplate what we're going to do next, and no serious work is involved for a period of time. We need to go through that type of cycle too. And this is the problem with moving forward. Is it's hard to spell out in ABCs. Like, remember when we went to school, they say if you're going to learn this, you need to do A, B, C, and D. Okay. And that doesn't always fit in the life of the disciple, because you've always got judgment entering in. We're talking about the positive act of judgment, where you look at everything that's happening and you pick the best possible course, best possible decision. And very seldom is it going to be spelled out to where you don't have any thinking involved. But the tendency of typical disciples and aspirants is they want somebody to tell them exactly what to do. But once a person approaches enlightenment, the reason you're enlightened is because you don't need somebody to tell you what to do. You've figured out that you can figure out what to do on your own, what your own next step is supposed to be. Now, even though I'm teaching this course and teach different things, I do not tell anyone that I teach what their next step is, because that's what you got to figure out. If somebody asks for advice, I'll give it to the best of my ability, but basically, your next step, whatever it is up to you. Now, for people that haven't approached being close to discipleship, some of those people actually need to be told. And thus they find themselves in a church or a cult or a group where they have somebody telling them what to do, who to marry, what to do for a living, what they're supposed to do next, what they're supposed to do with their lives. So people that need that authority will gravitate into those situations, and they will be in those situations until they have enough pain from authorities govern their life that they finally will break out. And then when they break out, then they have to figure out their next step pretty much on their own, between them, the information they get from the outside world, and their soul, and they have to make a judgment. So sometimes one cycle out of 7, your next step will just be to relax for a while. 6 cycles out of 7, your next step will be to either do something to further your own progression, or to be of service to help others with their progression or their life in some way. So that's an interesting thing. So experience is a key. And this is what we want to look for to a degree. How can I have a new experience? And so ask yourself this question and look for ways to go into new types of experience. Now, there's different ways to have experience. You can have different experiences with meditation, for instance, and using visualization, you can imagine any experience possible. That's if you're kind of consigned to your home pretty much, that's one way to do it. Other ways is to figure up some physical project that you want to do, something that you want to accomplish, some new thing you may want to learn. So there's a lot of avenues to create new experiences, but the important thing for each disciple to think about is what to do next, rather than just sit back and wait for your soul to come up with some something you may not like as your new experience. Because when you give up yourself and leave it up to your soul, and your soul will often figure that you need some type of painful experience will be the only thing that will make you move. So we want to take the initiative ourselves without forcing our soul to look down on us and figure out something. But in between, while we're trying to do that, we communicate with our soul and higher self as much as possible, and it will give us inspirations and ideas about what to do, that we can proceed along joyfully rather than painfully. So that's a choice pretty much always. Are we going to move ahead with joy and zest and peace, or are we going to be forced to move ahead through painful experience? And that's always the choice. So that's a strong consideration for disciples to consider. Okay, any comments or questions on that before we move forward here?
Well, I think that when you become aware that you want to grow and you want to progress, you don't have to go shaking the trees to see what nuts fall down. The things appear in your life. People show up, events occur, and you realize that's what you need to do.
Yeah. And the problem a lot of people have, DK tells us, when they get to be around 56 or so, passing their second Saturn cycle, he said 90% of the people crystallize, and they don't really move themselves into any new learning situation. Now, they may get some brain learning, but I'm talking about real learning. And Edward's a good example. How old are you again, Edward? He's our elder statesman here in our group.
I'm a 2,000-year-old man.
Yeah, you're 80-something, if I remember right.
Right, 80-something.
Yeah, and so he's definitely passed his second Saturn cycle and hasn't crystallized yet. He's still learning, and so he's a good example for us.
Many trips around the sun.
Yeah. So a lot of people Edward's age just they just complain about newfangled things, and they don't want to learn anything new. Okay, then he talks about the consciousness of the different three different types of consciousness. One he calls a Lemurian consciousness, the Atlantean consciousness, and the Aryan consciousness. The first physical race was called the Lemurian, and that focused on the physical life and instinct. And back then, we developed a lot of instinct for survival. When you look at the animals, for instance, they have tremendous instinct about them as to when they're in danger and different things. And we developed that. And then during the Atlantean consciousness, we developed our emotional self. We learned to feel, and we also picked up quite a bit of psychic talent. All regular psychism is usually from the astral plane. And then the Aryan consciousness focuses on the mind. And the human race as a whole right now is developing the mind. And we're moving to assist this. We're moving into the Aquarian age, and Aquarius is a very strong mental sign. It's an air sign, and an air, of course, in astrology is a symbol of the mind. Now we're moving from Pisces, and Pisces is a water sign, and Pisces is the most feeling of all the signs in the zodiac. It focuses more on the emotional side than anything else. And we can see this in our history the past 2,000 years. Crusades is a quintessential example of of tremendous emotion playing out, one side fighting another side because of the strong feeling of being right. And so we have the uh, pers- all kinds of persecution going on. It's all this was governed by feeling, and we had positive things by feeling also. You know, the Christ himself introduced tremendous positive feeling about faith, hope, love, and then others took it later and twisted it the wrong direction. But so we're moving out of the Piscean age, but the emotional side is so powerful that it doesn't want to let go to the shift to the mind. And so it's fighting for survival as much as possible. It will be with us for a while. And there's also a lot of six-ray egos that are still in incarnation. And these people in the sixth ray are strongly linked to the Piscean age, and they will fight for their ideals on an emotional level rather than the mental level. And he says that these are going out of incarnation in the next 100 years or so. The sixth ray people will not be coming in the incarnation anymore. We'll have a lot more seventh ray people coming in incarnation. This will shift the consciousness of humanity a lot over the next 100 years or so. So the seventh ray that governs the age of Aquarius has been coming into incarnation since I think 1775, if I remember right. So, but it hasn't reached its full power yet. It's going to reach its full strength over the next 100 years or so. And this governs the age of Aquarius, governs it governs focuses a lot more on mind, and it's closely associated with the first ray of willpower and purpose. But it's willpower and purpose that's kind of altered and manifests in such a way that we have physical form materializing that represents the will of God, so to speak. And so this will manifest in business is controlled by the seventh ray. So we're going to have business that's going to be turned from what it was in the industrial age, where it was very controlling, to business which is very beneficial and cooperative. Groups and individuals will participate in ownership, and so we'll have a much improved situation over say big business in the past. It'll be more organized to service. So the other thing, the difference between the two ages, the key word for Pisces was sacrifice. The key word for Aquarius that we're going into is service. Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be sacrifice. What we do as we move from one age to another, we take the best out of the previous age and we incorporate it in the new. So we will look at sacrifice from its positive aspect, where true sacrifice is where you're merely paying for something that will be more productive for you than what you're giving away. For instance, when you go to the store and you give them $5 to purchase something, you want that you're sacrificing the $5 bill, but you want what the $5 buys more than you want the $5. Okay, so this, with true sacrifice, what you get is you sacrifice in a way that you actually benefit more than the sacrifice, but it doesn't always seem that way. And when we serve, and remember, service is the key of Aquarius, and when we serve, we sacrifice our time, our talents, sometimes our money, all kinds of things. And in our sacrifice, we wind up getting actually more than we paid. What we get back in return is more beneficial than what we gave out. So that's interesting to think of. He says, peace was the objective of the Atlantean aspirant. Realization is that of the Aryan disciple, and this takes a constant struggle and adaptation. Until consciousness is stabilized in the self, in the one, then the initiate knows himself to be the onlooking unity, watching the phenomenal phantasmagoria of life in the form. He passes from one sense of unity to a sense of duality, and from thence to a higher unity. So this is an interesting statement. The disciple, as he is making progress, passes from one sense of unity to a sense of duality. So before we were born, we actually had a sense of unity because we were one with our souls. And then we come down here and we're in a dual situation where everything is a duality. The duality is, there's duality in just about everything, but the one of the biggest dualities we have in our path right now is a duality, what he calls between the self and the not self. Okay. Joshua, what do you think he means when he talks about the not self?
Basically the personality, what we regard as the self usually.
What does he call it, the not self, do you think?
Well, because it's like if you're playing a video game, you got your character. Well, I mean, it depends on what video game, but you have your character you're playing as, and you get so into it, and you think like, oh, that's me, and I'm the one doing all this stuff. But you forget that you're really the person playing the game. You've gotten so engrossed.
Right. In other words, if you have an avatar when you're playing the game and you identify with that avatar, that's really your not self, right? That's not you, but you've got your energy into it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really good example. And so we could look at life like a video game that's being played by the soul. The soul projects a portion of itself into our bodies, and we are the avatar of the soul. Okay. And the teachers call this us right here where we are. We're the not self. Okay. And the true self is the higher self, which exists in the world of the souls. And so it's playing a game using us, which is interesting. So we're part of a master game that's being played from a higher dimension. Kind of interesting way of looking at it. So we're in this duality. So as a disciple progresses, it seems when we begin our progress that our not self is all there is. So that appears to be a unity that we're in. Okay. So it's not a real unity, but it's kind of an illusionary unity that here we are, I'm me, and this is all there is to it. Us human beings evolved out of primordial slime and all this, and so we're just here, and this is all there is to me. Then as you progress along, you sense there's something else that you're connected to. First of all, it's just God, nebulous God out there that is watching over you. People get that feeling. And eventually this feeling evolves until people realize there's a higher part of themselves that they're connected to. And thus they move into what DK calls a duality. Okay. So they move into this duality where the disciple realizes there's a not self and there's a true self. There's a false self and a true self. There's the avatar, and then there's the one controlling the avatar. And then the next step, so, first of all, there was unity where he just thought there was self, and then there was division where he sees the not self and the self, and then he has to merge the two. So the two become one, and then it moves into what he calls the higher unity. And this is where the soul actually comes into the avatar, so to speak. And suppose you're playing a game and you're just kind of playing it from a distance, and half of it's controlled by the computer program and half of it's controlled by you. And then you decide, I am going to go into the avatar and be one with the avatar. Okay. And this eventually happens where the not self and the self join. So they're linked. So they become one, and then you have what he calls the higher unity. Okay. Any comments or questions on that idea?
It's like the movie Avatar, where at first, I don't know who's seen that.
Yeah, I think everybody has. Yeah.
Separate from his avatar, and then in the end, he merges with it and becomes one.
That's a really good point. Yeah, he did merge with it in the end, didn't he? Yeah. So first of all, you're right. In the movie Avatar, the Avatar and him were separate, and then they did merge.
They're making a whole new round of those movies.
Yeah, I think he's making 3, hasn't he? He's been working on them for years and years, but he's going to put out, I think, 1 a year for 3 years. I bet they're going to be really big hits. Okay, what the disciple has to do to have this merging is he has to move away from identifying with the form and identify with the soul instead. He realizes there's nothing but the soul, and then the higher state of unity comes into play. So the lessons from the first Immortal book is really good. He learns in the first Immortal book that first of all, he is not his body. And the average man identifies very strongly with his body, and the atheists, they think they are their body. That's all there is. But the person has to realize, no, I'm not my body. The second step is realizing, no, I'm not really even my emotions. Now, the average person, most people out there identify strongly with their emotions, and if they feel a certain way, they think that's them. But that's their emotional body is feeling that, and they are not really their emotional body. Their emotional body is a vehicle which is causing this feeling. It's like you have an air conditioner, and the air conditioner makes you feel warm or cold, but you are not the air conditioner. Even though you may turn the air conditioner up and down, you may have control over it, you are still not the air conditioner. Okay? The air conditioner is just making you feel hot or cold. Your emotional body just makes you feel angry or love or hate or jealousy or whatever. But that's not you. That's you turning the thermos, but you're just turning the thermostat on something that is not you. And even your mind, you are not really your mind. Now, the mind, people, when you talk about mind, people often think brain. Brain is not mind. Your brain is just a computer. You're definitely not your brain. You also are not your mind, but you use your mind. Your mind is also a vehicle that you use, and you put programming in your mind, just like you put programming in your computer. You're not your computer, but you put you use your computer, and so the you have two parts of your mind. The lower part, which is a lot like a computer, but the higher part is like a computer with artificial intelligence. And so, but you are a pure spirit that that uses all these things, and this is what we want to contact and come to the realization. But okay. He says there are two esoteric schools of thought. One emphasizes the life aspect and appears to negate duality. The other emphasizes the duality of the lower and the higher self. Both are necessary to understand. When we first started the group, we had a number of people coming in the group and telling us that duality was not where it is. And now we tried to teach both aspects. Number one is that there's a consciousness which is beyond duality, or a life aspect beyond duality. Duality is like the wavelength, and then that which makes the wavelength is beyond duality, but it also originates duality. And so this is where a lot of schools of thought are focusing on, is the great void that they say we're supposed to enter. And we've had a number of people come into the group over the years telling us we're missing the great opportunity to enter the great void, which is beyond duality. And I explained to them that, so you're in a physical body because you're in a physical body is created out of duality. So, but it's important to understand the oneness, but it's also important to understand the duality. And the duality is we are here and our soul is in another dimension, for want of a better word, sphere, plane. And we must take these, understand how the duality works and how there's duality in all things. So both schools of thought need to be understood to have the full idea. To achieve oneness, aspirant must battle duality on the astral level and focus the mind, and the disciple on the mental to focus on the intuition. So the intuition is above the mind. And the great part about the intuition, the mind figures out things by saying A plus B equals C, okay? But the intuition gives a flash of a whole picture. So you don't really need to add A plus B, because once the disciple taps into what you might call the higher part of the mind that's linked to the intuition, he will get flashes that A plus B equals C plus a whole bunch of other stuff will just flash into his mind. And then he goes back on the mind and he analyzes that intuition that he's receiving, and he puts it into segments of A plus B equals C. And so the intuition is something that, the intuitive level is something that all aspirants look forward to discovering and mastering. Okay, any comments or questions on this before we move ahead here on duality or the great void, the oneness?
Well, there's that comment. I used to be different, but now I'm the same.
Yeah, right. Next, next he talks about cleavages, and cleavages. Well, he talks about it regularly in his writings, and in cleavages we have. Um, we're forced to look at the dualities that manifest in our life. And so these, as we look at these things that kind of separate one thing from another, we have to figure out how to blend them and bring them back together. We have a tremendous cleavage going on right now in our political system, and the fact that we have Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, seeing each other as so different from each other that they, many of them actually hate each other. And so this is a tremendous cleavage, and he talks about these cleavages need to be mended. We need, the disciple looks for cleavages that can be healed and bring them together. And this is something that's badly needed. We may need a lot more disciples out there working to heal the cleavages.
Some cleavages look pretty nice just the way they are.
All right, Rick. Okay, in himself, he says the aspirant repeats the racial unfoldment and reenacts the racial drama. You know, he talks about this like the embryo, as it's developing in the womb, it repeats the evolution of life on Earth. You know, when we start out in the womb, we actually have a tail and everything, you know. And so he says we, in himself, as we progress through our life, we go through the consciousness of humanity and ourselves way back in time and we start out as a baby just knowing pretty much nothing, and our progress moves forward until we reach around the age of 21, and at the age of 21 we reach pretty much close to the consciousness that we left off in our past life. And then he says by the age of 35 we reach a time where we have pretty much a consciousness of where we're supposed to be in our spiritual progression. So these are two key dates, the age of 21 and the age of 35 in our developing our consciousness. Okay, he says the movement for spreading the secret doctrine, he says, is 18 million years old. But 18 million years ago, it's hard to believe they did much with the secret doctrine with average humanity back in that time, because it was so primitive. But he does talk here about, he doesn't say how far back some of the organizations are, but since man developed self-awareness, the hierarchy has been working to try to stimulate us. And he says that only 4 of the original instigators of the secret doctrine remain with us. The work now lies in the hands of 3 groups of life. And he says 1 is Earth humanity, 2nd is extraplanetary entities, and 3rd, a large group of devas of superhuman evolution. So we have what he calls the secret doctrine is been promoted over all these years. And he says these in their aggregate form the occult hierarchy of the planet, working in 3 main divisions and 7 groups. Says in the very early stages, the hierarchy was called by various names. Among others, this is in very ancient times, it was called the Temple of Ibez, I-B-E-Z. He says this was founded in South America by members of the hierarchy who incarnated to assist primitive humans at that time. And back at that time, he says, the way the hierarchy had to work through humans was much different than today. He says it was so different that we wouldn't hardly recognize that as being productive today, perhaps, because when you work with people of different consciousness, you have to work with them different ways. Just like if you're teaching kindergarten, you use a different approach than if you're teaching a college course. Okay, so they aroused humanity in several different ways. Number one was by a direct incarnation of the White Brotherhood. In other words, that was a time when the gods walked with men, as is sometimes termed. He says they implanted what is called in the occult scriptures the spark of mind in the animal form. So these guys are very primitive, and so their main goal was to stimulate the spark of mind. And to stimulate growth, it was decided, he said, about 17 million years ago, to have on the dense physical plane an organization and headquarters for the mysteries, and have a band of adepts and koans who would function in dense physical bodies and thus meet the need of the rapidly awakening humanity. The first outpost of the Temple of Ibez was in South America, and much later among the Mayas. A third branch was in the Himalayas. Now the Himalayas is that branch is still there, and that's where DK resides right now. He says discoveries will be made revealing the reality of the old form of hierarchical work. Ancient records and monuments will be revealed, some above ground and many in subterranean fastnesses. So in other words, he says there's going to be subterranean places discovered that have these ancient records and well, he calls them ancient records and monuments. In other words, it's like archaeologists unearth the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. They were buried underground, and they unearthed those things. And when they did, they thought, "Wow, we've made quite a discovery here." He says this is going to happen some more. We're going to discover some interesting things that will reveal that the hierarchy has been working among humanity for much longer than anyone suspects. The farthest they can go back in time for humanity right now is about a couple million years, finding evidence of accepted by the establishment. There's a lot of evidence that has been discovered that takes man back more than a couple million years, but it's not accepted by orthodoxy. But more and more evidence is surfacing. If you go to YouTube, just type in alternative archaeology, or what's the word for it? Just type in archaeology, pyramids or whatever, and YouTube will come up with all kinds of interesting things to watch. And you'll find there's quite a bit of evidence out there they're putting on the web about ancient societies that are older than orthodoxy accepts. He says they had to use a much different methods to stimulate primitive man. They taught with symbols and mysticism, which to us, he says, would be crude. They taught self-realization, not so much seeing God in others. And then finally, the door was closed to the animal kingdom and initiation was instituted. So in other words, in that time, man was so much animal-like that a lot of the animal-type men were being stimulated into self-consciousness. And then when a certain number was reached, that door was closed. And then they concentrated on stimulating the evolution of the people that had made the transition. Gradually, the teaching shifted from mysticism to the individual seeing the God in all and group consciousness. So in previous ages, the concentration was improving the guy so he becomes more self-aware, develops his talents and everything. But now what the hierarchy is trying to do with people like us is get us more focused in seeing group life, group consciousness. Like when we have our meditation and see us in a circle and visualize this, we're focusing on group consciousness. And during the week, when we're not in contact with each other, we can tune in. Just say you're just sitting back, don't have anything to do. Well, think of the group and think of yourself being linked. Remember that energy follows thought, and so your thought is still active when we're not together as a group. So continue to keep that link alive, and the things we do in our various meditations will have more power that way. Okay, we're reaching end of our time already. This time went fast. We'll continue this next week. We'll talk a little bit more about the Temple of Ibez, which is a pretty interesting subject next week. And we'll any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
That's one of the few parts of the DK books where he goes into the stuff that I used to read, like about, aliens and all that kind of thing. Like if he expanded that whole thing into one book about Ibez and ancient alien history and that sort of thing.
Well, he does mention that other planetary entities were involved. So now the question is, were they involved because they just came in the spirit and incarnated? Or were they involved because they came in flying saucers and also assisted? So that question remains open. We know that extraplanetary entities are involved here on this earth, but and we know that some of them are actually incarnate, but are there other methods like the flying saucer type methods?
There's evidence of those in art in various places, in the vehicles that they have shown, but they probably also come in spirit as well.
Right. It's funny how silent DK is. He doesn't say anything about the flying saucer type stuff.
Yeah.
He does talk about aliens on other planets. He talks about how there's all kinds of different life forms. He says about everything you can imagine is out there somewhere. But then he says that there are extraplanetary entities that are assisting this Earth, but he doesn't give any details about how outside of true spiritual means. So but we didn't have much information about UFOs until 1947 when Kenneth Arnold spotted the first one that made the big headlines. And so most of his works were written before that time. So because there's been so much talk of it since then, the next big installment that comes out of from the masters might give us a lot more details about that.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Aykroyd, he's, big into, I don't know, new age sort of stuff, I guess.
Dan Aykroyd?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, that was kind of, he was one of the main writers behind Ghostbusters, and he interjected all this kind of metaphysical thought into the movie. But he was, like, the guy, Ivan Reitman and Bill Murray and other people didn't really necessarily believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
He was like a big believer.
But he's a true believer, huh?
Yeah, I saw this interview with him, and he was talking about how one night, maybe this was in Canada, I think, he was sleeping there, him and his wife, and, he was made to go out of bed, and he, like, got out of bed and, like, pointed up in the sky, and he didn't realize what was going on, but his wife told him later, and apparently all these people did the same thing. They pointed up to this, like, pink light in the sky or something like that. But it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I imagine if somebody has an actual encounter that changes his life. And I know a number of the stories I read that people were totally non-believers until they had some type of experience. And nothing like experience to change you around. Now, of course, some things that we think are experiences are really caused by illusion of some type. So we only know for sure through our own experience and our own investigations. Because a lot of people that claim experience, well, for instance, of seeing God or angels or past famous people appearing to them, and then contradicting each other. So because of contradictions, that a lot of people who claim experience are either lying or in illusion. So it's important to get your own confirmation on everything that's important in your life. That's for sure. Okay, any other comments or questions?
When I was 16, I read a book called Unveiled Mysteries, where they talk about these temples in South America.
Oh, really?
It was written by the Ballards from the I Am group.
Oh.
But there's a lot of good there, even though a lot of it is very, I don't know, you might say illusionary, but there was a lot of basic stuff there.
I wonder if they've found anything that could be 17 million years old, which was the first temple built there, he says, was 17 million years ago. That's a long time. I wonder if any of that's still